He was adopted by a billionaire after losing his parents, but inside the mansion, the boy faced years of silent suffering. He was never allowed to sit at the table, eat like a child, or speak without fear. Everyone saw a perfect family, but none of them knew the strict rules he was quietly forced to follow behind closed doors. That is, until one day, a quiet new maid started noticing the signs. A whisper that didn't match his smile, a routine that felt too controlled, a silence that spoke louder than words, and then, the moment that changed everything, she discovered the truth he had been too afraid to say out loud. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Arthur was a billionaire known all around the world. People respected him for his intelligence, his money, and his calm attitude. But one day, everything changed. His wife went into labor, but something went wrong. She didn't survive the birth, and neither did the baby. In just one moment, Arthur lost both his wife and his child. Everyone felt sorry for him and treated him like a man who had been unlucky. They gave him kind words, sympathy, and space to grieve. But Arthur did not feel just sadness. Inside, he felt something worse. He felt like life had betrayed him. He didn't cry or scream. He stayed quiet on the outside, but deep down, a cold kind of anger started to grow. He thought that if life could take everything from him like this, then he would never trust life again. From that day forward, he began to change completely. Arthur no longer believed in things like destiny, luck, or love. He told himself that these ideas were just ways people tried to make sense of their own weakness. What really mattered, he thought, was control. If he had more control, maybe this tragedy wouldn't have happened. He blamed the doctors, the hospital, and even himself for not being powerful enough to stop it. So he made a decision. He would never again feel weak or helpless. He would never let life decide his fate again. He began to rebuild his world, but this time he would be the one in charge of every part. He no longer smiled often. He avoided close friendships. He focused only on his work and his money. His eyes, once soft and warm, became sharp and cold. People said he had become more serious, more focused. But the truth was, Arthur was preparing for a new kind of life. Over the next few years, Arthur's company expanded quickly. He invested in new industries, bought smaller companies, and made smarter business moves than anyone else. Everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. But even though his bank accounts kept growing, the empty feeling inside him didn't go away. At night, when the world was quiet, he still thought about his wife and the baby. He never spoke their names. He never visited their graves. Instead, he buried the pain deep inside and worked even harder to keep his mind busy. He hired only the best people and demanded perfection from everyone around him. He liked being in control. He liked knowing that no one could hurt him now. But no amount of success made the pain disappear. The truth was that Arthur was still deeply wounded, but he didn't want to heal. He wanted to dominate, to never feel powerless again. As time passed, Arthur noticed something important. He had money, respect, and control, but people were beginning to see him as distant and isolated. News articles questioned his personal life. Business partners wondered why he always worked alone. Investors talked about his cold personality. This bothered Arthur, not because he cared about their opinions, but because he knew image was everything. A man without a family, without a soft side, could start to look suspicious or unstable in the public eye. So Arthur began to plan something new. He didn't want love or companionship. He wanted control over how people saw him. He needed to look complete again, like a man who had rebuilt himself, not just in business, but in life. So, in secret, he began working on a new chapter. A plan to build a family again, not for love, but to protect his reputation and power. Arthur's new plan was not romantic. He did not search for someone to love. He searched for someone who could help him restore the image of a perfect life. He looked into backgrounds, personalities, and social reputations. He wanted someone who could fit into his world without causing problems. Every step was calculated, like a business decision. He hired private investigators, image consultants, and even psychologists to help him make the perfect choice. He treated it like he was acquiring a new company, not starting a new life. In his mind, emotions were dangerous. Control was safety. If he could choose every part of this new life carefully, maybe he would never be hurt again. No more surprises, no more chaos. Everything would go according to plan. And this time, Arthur would be the one writing the rules, not life. This wasn't about moving on. It was about taking back control. Even with this detailed plan, Arthur sometimes felt small cracks in his shield. When he saw children playing or heard news of couples starting families, there were brief moments when pain tried to return. But he always stopped it. He reminded himself that love had made him weak once before, and he would not let it happen again. This new family would be different. It would be built like a company, with structure and logic. No feelings, just order. He convinced himself that this was the smart way to live. And slowly, the plan started to take shape. He arranged meetings, visits, and interviews without anyone knowing his real purpose. Arthur was in control again. Everything was moving the way he wanted. The world still saw him as a victim of the past, but inside he was turning that pain into something else, power. He was ready to prove he could dominate fate itself. Arthur had made up his mind. He would adopt a child. This was not a quick decision. He had thought about it for a long time. In his eyes, it was not about love or kindness. It was about control. He wanted someone to shape and raise in his own way. With his wealth and influence, Arthur reached out to several agencies and visited only the most exclusive orphanages. He didn't want just any child. He wanted the right one, quiet, obedient, and easy to mold. After many visits, he finally found a boy who seemed to match what he was looking for. The child was small, with calm eyes and a soft voice. He didn't speak much, but he listened carefully. Arthur saw potential. He saw someone who could become like him, strong, controlled, and unbreakable. Without hesitation, he began the adoption process and made everything official. The media quickly picked up the story. "Billionaire gives hope to orphan," the headlines read. News outlets showed photos of Arthur holding the child's hand, smiling and waving at reporters. Journalists praised him as a generous man with a kind heart. Public opinion shifted. People who once saw Arthur as cold now called him a hero. They believed he had changed. At charity events and public gatherings, strangers approached him to thank him for his act of love. Arthur responded politely, giving short, humble answers. But none of it was real. He didn't feel warmth or love. He felt satisfaction. His plan was working. He was fixing his image, step by step. The boy became part of that plan. Arthur dressed him in expensive clothes, hired tutors, and gave him toys, but each gift had a purpose. Arthur wanted obedience. He wanted control. This was not a family. It was a system. To the boy, everything felt magical at first. He had come from a place where there was very little. Small meals, old clothes, and shared beds. Suddenly, he had his own room full of colorful books, toys, and a soft bed. He ate well, had clean clothes, and was treated with respect by the staff in the house. When Arthur spoke to him, it was often with a calm tone. The boy believed he had been rescued. He didn't understand the real reason he was there. He thought Arthur wanted to be his father. At school, other kids asked him about his new life, and he said he was lucky. For a while, he believed it. He tried to please Arthur, doing well in his lessons and always staying quiet when told, but something was missing. Arthur never hugged him, never said, "I love you," and never asked how he felt. The warmth of family was not there. Inside the house, rules were strict. The boy couldn't go to certain rooms. He had to wake up and sleep at exact times. Tutors and assistants followed detailed instructions. Every activity had a goal: to make the boy smarter, stronger, or more obedient. There was no space for fun or mistakes. If the boy spoke too loudly or asked too many questions, Arthur would correct him with cold words. Arthur didn't yell, but his silence could be worse. One look from him was enough to make the boy feel nervous. Over time, the child started to act more like a machine. He stopped talking unless spoken to. He smiled less. Arthur called this progress. He believed he was turning the boy into something better. But what he was really doing was removing the child's freedom. The boy was not learning to live, he was learning to obey, and he didn't even realize it yet. Arthur continued to control every part of the boy's life. From what he ate to what he read, every detail was carefully chosen. Arthur didn't teach him to dream, but to follow. He didn't want a happy child. He wanted a reflection of himself. Someone with no weaknesses, no emotional distractions. He believed this was the right way to raise a person. At public events, the boy stood beside Arthur, quiet and well-behaved. People praised how polite and mature he was. Arthur acted like a proud father, but inside he felt no love. He felt pride in his own plan, in his ability to shape another human. The boy, still young, continued to believe he had been saved. He looked at Arthur with hope, trying to earn his approval. But Arthur saw him as a project, not a son. The outside world saw happiness. But behind the doors of the mansion, the truth was different. Time passed and nothing changed. The world kept applauding Arthur for his kindness. At dinners and interviews, he talked about giving the boy a new chance. He used words like family, healing, and future. But these were just words. Arthur didn't want a real bond. He wanted power. The boy, once cheerful, became more closed off. He followed every rule, said every line, but stopped asking questions. He didn't realize he wasn't free. He had not gained a father. He had entered a place with invisible chains. Arthur had no plan to love him, only to shape him. He didn't see the child's feelings as important. To Arthur, emotions were problems. What he wanted was perfection and control, and now he had both. The newspapers still called it a beautiful story, but they didn't know the truth. Inside that perfect-looking home, the boy wasn't growing. He was disappearing. As the years went by, the boy began to show who he really was. He was quiet, gentle, and often preferred to be alone. He liked to draw for hours, using colored pencils on thick paper. Sometimes he would sit by a window and softly hum songs he made up in his head. He didn't enjoy loud parties or big groups of people. He avoided attention and didn't like being in the spotlight. Arthur noticed all these things and became more and more frustrated. This was not what he had wanted in a son. He had hoped for someone strong, confident, and ready to impress others. The boy's softness felt like a problem to Arthur. Instead of supporting the child's natural personality, Arthur saw it as a flaw that needed to be fixed. He believed his son had to be different, and because of that, he began to treat the boy in a very cold way. Arthur tried to change the boy through pressure and control. At public events, he gave strict instructions. Smile when people talk to you. Stand straight. Don't speak unless someone asks you a question. At fancy dinners, the boy had to wear clothes he didn't like and sit silently next to Arthur. He was told how to eat, how to act, and even how to laugh. People would compliment Arthur, saying his son was well-behaved and polite, but they didn't see what happened later. After each event, Arthur would criticize him. He called him weak, boring, and a disappointment. He said things like, "You're not worthy of my name," or "Real men don't act like that." The boy didn't understand what he was doing wrong. He tried to be better, but nothing was ever enough. Over time, he began to feel nervous all the time, especially around Arthur. He felt like he was always failing, no matter what he did. The boy started to hide his true self. He stopped drawing when anyone could see. He only hummed quietly when he was sure he was alone. He watched every word he said, worried it would be the wrong one. He became more careful, more afraid. When Arthur walked into a room, the boy stood up fast and kept his eyes low. He tried to read Arthur's face, looking for signs of anger or approval. But Arthur rarely showed any kindness. He gave orders, pointed out mistakes, and expected the boy to act like a model of strength and success. The boy didn't feel like a person in the house. He felt more like a tool, something to be used to make Arthur look good. At school, he didn't talk much either. He didn't trust anyone. Even when teachers praised his creativity, he stayed quiet. Deep inside, he felt like there was something wrong with him. Arthur never showed warmth or care. He didn't ask about the boy's feelings or dreams. He didn't tell stories or play games. Every interaction was about control, appearance, and rules. The boy began to believe that love had to be earned and that he wasn't good enough to deserve it. If he cried, Arthur told him to toughen up. If he smiled at the wrong time, Arthur would scold him. When the boy once brought a drawing to show him, Arthur didn't even look. He just said, "That's useless. Go do something that matters." The boy tore the drawing into pieces later that night. Each day, the boy felt smaller inside. The house was full of expensive things, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a place where he had to be perfect all the time or risk punishment. No one knew what was really going on behind those closed doors. Outsiders still believed Arthur was a wonderful father. In public, he spoke proudly about his son's discipline and good manners. The boy was quiet and polite, so people thought he was happy. No one asked him how he really felt. No one noticed how tense he became around Arthur. Inside the house, the boy walked carefully, stayed quiet, and kept to himself. He learned that if he stayed invisible, he would avoid Arthur's anger. He stopped asking for attention or comfort. His room became the only place where he could breathe freely, but even there, he never felt completely safe. He kept his drawings hidden under his mattress. He wrote stories in notebooks that he never showed anyone. He learned to survive by pretending to be fine, pretending to be what Arthur wanted. But inside, he was scared, confused, and sad. All he really wanted was to be accepted and loved for who he was. Years passed, but nothing changed for the boy. He grew older, but his fear stayed the same. Arthur didn't see a son. He saw a project that had failed. The boy, now more aware of things, realized that what he had wasn't a family. It was a trap. Arthur didn't want a connection, just control. The boy wasn't treated like a human being with thoughts and feelings. He was treated like a mirror, expected to reflect Arthur's image. But he didn't fit that mold. He never had. He didn't want to be powerful or impressive. He just wanted to feel safe, to feel loved. But the house he lived in wasn't a home. It was a place where mistakes were punished, emotions were ignored, and silence became normal. From the outside, the mansion looked perfect, but on the inside, it was a cage. And the boy, who only wanted to be loved, lived trapped inside it every day. Arthur was tired of hiring workers who didn't last long. Many housekeepers had come and gone over the years. Some couldn't handle the cold and strict environment of the mansion. Others simply left without giving a reason. Arthur never cared why they left. He just replaced them. After the latest one quit, he told his staff to find someone reliable. A few days later, Helena was hired. She was young, quiet, and did her job with care. Arthur liked that she didn't talk too much and followed instructions. She didn't try to become friendly. She worked silently, never asking questions. What no one knew was that Helena carried deep pain. Years ago, she had lost her daughter in a terrible accident. Since then, she had become distant and kept her feelings hidden. Even though she looked calm on the outside, inside she lived with sadness. She had accepted the job just to keep moving forward. When Helena first stepped into the mansion, she immediately felt something strange. The house was clean and beautiful, but it didn't feel warm. Everything looked perfect, but it felt cold. As she walked through the rooms, she noticed how quiet it was. There were no sounds of laughter, talking, or even music. Then she saw the boy. He was sitting on the floor of his room, quietly drawing. When she passed by, he quickly put his paper away and looked down. Helena greeted him, but he didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. She didn't take it personally. Instead, she noticed something in his behavior, a kind of fear she had seen before. It reminded her of how she had acted after her daughter died. Always quiet, always alert, afraid of saying the wrong thing. That kind of silence was not normal. It was the silence of someone trying to survive something painful. At first, Helena just did her job. She cleaned the rooms, prepared the laundry, and followed the schedule given by Arthur's assistant. She didn't speak unless someone spoke to her. She didn't ask questions, but each day she noticed more. The boy never smiled. He always seemed nervous, especially when Arthur was near. Helena saw how the boy watched his father carefully, like he was trying to guess what would happen next. The boy walked lightly, almost like he didn't want to be heard. At dinner, he didn't talk. He sat straight and stiff. Helena remembered her daughter's voice, her laughter, the way she used to run through the house. This mansion was nothing like that. Something was wrong here. But Helena kept those thoughts to herself. She had been hired to clean, not to get involved. Still, each time she saw the boy, something in her heart stirred. He reminded her of someone she had lost. One day, while cleaning the boy's room, Helena found a drawing under the bed. It was a simple picture of a house, a woman, and a child holding hands. There were no names written, but she felt a deep emotion looking at it. She carefully placed it back where she found it. That night, she thought about her daughter. The two of them used to draw together. Her daughter would make colorful pictures and show them proudly. After the accident, Helena had thrown away all the drawings. She couldn't look at them. But now, seeing this boy's quiet pain brought back those memories. He wasn't acting like a normal child. He was closed off, quiet, and scared. Helena knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror many times. Her job didn't include helping him, but she couldn't ignore what she saw. Her instincts, shaped by grief, told her this boy needed something more. As the days went on, Helena paid more attention. She saw how Arthur spoke to the boy, not with kindness, but with cold orders and harsh looks. Arthur never touched the boy with care, never asked how he was doing, and never showed real affection. In public, Arthur acted like a proud father. But inside the house, he treated the boy like a robot that needed to follow commands. Helena began to feel protective. She didn't speak out, but she started doing small things. She left extra snacks on the boy's table. She made his bed in a softer way. Sometimes she left a new pencil or sheet of paper on his desk. These were tiny gestures, but they were her way of saying, "I see you." She didn't want to scare him or push too hard. But deep inside, she was connecting with the boy through quiet actions. She couldn't ignore her feelings anymore. Helena knew her place in the mansion. She was just the housekeeper, nothing more, but something had started to change. Each time she saw the boy alone, quiet and afraid, she felt a pull in her heart. She had come to the mansion to escape her own pain, not to form new bonds. But this child reminded her so much of her daughter, not in looks, but in his silence, his sadness. She could see that he needed someone. Maybe he didn't even know it yet. She didn't plan to become a mother again. She wasn't trying to replace what she had lost. But a kind of compassion was growing inside her. She couldn't explain it fully, but she knew she couldn't stay distant forever. The boy wasn't just another child. He was someone who had been forgotten inside a rich house. And Helena, still grieving, began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. With time, Helena started noticing things that didn't feel right. They were small details at first, but they kept happening. The boy would freeze when Arthur entered the room. He would stop whatever he was doing and stand still, eyes lowered, shoulders tense. Even when no one gave him instructions, he acted like he was waiting for orders. He didn't move freely as most children do. Helena began watching more closely. During breakfast, the boy wouldn't start eating unless someone told him he could. Once, as she was serving lunch, he quietly whispered, "He doesn't let me sit, Mommy." Helena felt her chest tighten. She leaned down and asked gently, "Who doesn't let you sit?" The boy didn't answer. He simply lowered his head and looked away. It was a quiet moment, but it said a lot. Helena couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. Something was definitely wrong. After that moment, Helena began paying even more attention. Every day she saw new signs. They weren't always physical. They were in how the boy acted, how he carried himself. His body was tense, his steps quiet, his eyes always alert. If someone dropped something or raised their voice, he would jump. He never smiled or played like other kids. Sometimes, after Arthur scolded him behind closed doors, Helena would hear the sound of a door slamming, followed by silence. One evening, she passed the boy's room and heard him crying softly into his pillow. Helena stood outside for a moment, unsure what to do. She felt torn between doing her job and helping the child, but one thing became clear. This was not just a strict home. This was a place where something was deeply wrong, and it was happening quietly, in the shadows, while the world believed everything was perfect. Arthur in public still acted like the perfect father. He wore the mask of a proud, successful man. He brought the boy to charity events, dressed him in expensive clothes, and made him pose for pictures. He told others that the boy was a blessing, a reason to keep going in life. But inside the mansion, he acted differently. He treated the child like a robot. He demanded perfect behavior, perfect posture, perfect speech. He never smiled at the boy. He never hugged him or asked how he felt. Mistakes were punished, not corrected. Arthur didn't yell. He used cold, sharp words that cut deep. "You embarrass me. Don't act like a fool. Fix your face." These weren't lessons. They were attacks. Helena saw it more clearly every day. This wasn't parenting. This was domination. She had worked in other houses before, but she had never seen a child treated like this, like an object. The boy's behavior slowly began to change. He became even more quiet than before, but around Helena, something different started to happen. He began to feel a little safer. At first it was small things, like handing her a drawing or whispering thank you when she tucked in his bedsheets. Then he began to stay near her while she worked. He wouldn't speak, just sit quietly in the same room. One afternoon, while she was folding towels, he said, "You're nice." She looked at him and smiled, but didn't push him to say more. A few days later, something even more surprising happened. As Helena poured him a glass of water, the boy softly said, "Thanks, Mommy." She stopped, confused. "What did you say?" she asked. The boy looked down. "Sorry," he whispered. But Helena didn't feel angry. Her heart broke a little. He hadn't said it by mistake. He said it because he needed someone. Helena didn't correct him after that. She didn't tell him not to say it again. In fact, each time he called her Mommy, she answered with kindness. She didn't fully understand how their bond had formed so quickly, but she felt it growing stronger every day. She wasn't trying to replace his mother. She wasn't even trying to become part of his life. But the boy had made a choice. He had reached out in the only way he knew. He was asking for protection without using those exact words. He saw something in Helena that he didn't see in anyone else. Safety. Every small gesture she gave him, he held on to. Helena realized that this was more than just a work problem. It was something deeply human. The boy had never received real love. Now he was trying to find it wherever he could, and he had chosen her. The signs of cruelty became impossible to ignore. The boy no longer acted like a child. He moved like someone walking through a minefield, always alert, always afraid. Helena had tried to stay neutral, but she couldn't anymore. Every moment of silence, every rule the boy followed with too much care, every flinch, it all told her the same thing. This wasn't a home. It was a cage. And the boy was learning to survive instead of grow. She started having trouble sleeping, thinking about what to do. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She had become a witness to something terrible. And the boy, calling her mommy more often now, was holding on to her like a lifeline. It wasn't a mistake. It was a silent plea for help. Helena knew it in her heart. The boy didn't need new toys or tutors. He needed care, warmth, and someone who saw him as a child, not a product. Helena started showing small signs of affection toward the boy. It wasn't planned or discussed. It happened naturally, as if something inside her just acted on instinct. One day, after dinner, she gave him an extra piece of dessert without saying anything. The boy looked surprised but smiled slightly before eating it slowly. Another time, she noticed he had trouble sleeping, so she sat by his door and told him a short story about a bird finding its way home. He didn't say much, but she could see in his eyes that he liked it. One afternoon, when he looked especially sad, she gave him a quick hug in the hallway, away from the cameras and staff. The hug was short, but the boy held on to her tightly. These moments didn't fix everything, but they brought him comfort. Still, no matter how kind she was, the fear inside him never truly went away. The boy reacted well to Helena's kindness. With her, he spoke a little more. He even smiled once or twice, which was something she hadn't seen before. He started waiting for her in the mornings and followed her around the house, saying nothing, just being close. It was clear that her presence made him feel safe, even if only for a little while. But that safety could be broken in a second. Every time Arthur entered the room, the boy's face would change. He would freeze, stop talking, and look down. His body would tense up as if preparing for something bad. Helena watched this over and over, and each time, it broke her heart. She wanted to protect him, but she also knew the rules. Arthur was powerful. If she made a mistake, she could lose her job, or worse, make things harder for the boy. The fear wasn't just his, it was hers too. Helena became more careful. She tried not to draw attention to herself or to the bond growing between her and the boy. But inside, her thoughts were loud. She began observing more closely, trying to understand what really happened in that house. She noticed things most people ignored. The boy always waited for permission before sitting down to eat. If he forgot, he would stand next to the table until someone noticed. Helena tested this once by staying silent. The boy stood beside his untouched plate for 10 full minutes before she told him to sit. She was shocked. Another day, she heard Arthur scolding the boy over a spilled drop of water. Arthur demanded that he get on his knees and apologize. The boy obeyed without arguing, his head low, eyes wide. Helena stood behind the door, fists clenched. These weren't rules, they were methods of control. It wasn't discipline, it was cruelty disguised as order. From that moment on, Helena couldn't ignore it anymore. The things Arthur made the boy do weren't just strict, they were humiliating. The child wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. He couldn't laugh, ask questions, or show any emotion without fear of being punished. Every part of his day was built around following Arthur's rules. Helena felt sick knowing that this was what the boy called life. She stayed up late thinking about how to help without getting caught. Each discovery made her feel more protective. This wasn't just about being a kind worker anymore. She was watching a child suffer and couldn't pretend not to see it. The boy had become her responsibility, even if no one said it out loud. She had no legal right to act like a parent, but emotionally, she was already there. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was the only adult showing him love. The bond between Helena and the boy deepened. He began to quietly call her mommy again, not in front of others, but during private moments. He didn't say it often, but when he did, it felt honest. Helena didn't correct him. Each time she heard it, she felt something inside her shift. She hadn't used the word mother for years, not since the accident that took her daughter away. That part of her life had been closed, but now it was slowly opening again. The boy didn't remind her of her daughter in appearance, but in spirit. That same quiet sadness, that same longing for comfort. Helena didn't plan to become emotionally involved when she took this job, but life had pulled her in. The boy didn't ask her to save him. He simply existed near her, showing his pain without words. And in doing so, he awakened something she thought had died forever. By now, Helena knew this wasn't just work. It wasn't just a job that paid bills or filled her schedule. It had become personal. Every meal she served, every blanket she tucked in, every quiet moment she shared with the boy carried meaning. She had entered the mansion as a housekeeper, hoping only to stay unnoticed. But the boy changed that. Without asking for anything directly, he had called out to her heart. Now she was torn. If she pushed too far, Arthur could fire her or retaliate. If she stayed quiet, she would be just another adult who failed to protect a child. The fear of losing her job was real, but the fear of abandoning the boy was stronger. She couldn't look at him and pretend she didn't care. She wasn't just watching someone suffer. She was being asked, silently and painfully, to be a mother again, and she couldn't walk away from that. One night, Helena was walking through the hallway with a stack of folded clothes in her hands. As she passed near Arthur's office, she heard shouting. She stopped. The voice was loud, angry, and full of rage. It was Arthur. She gently placed the clothes on a small table and moved closer, careful not to make noise. The door to the office was slightly open. She stayed behind it, hidden in the dark. Inside, Arthur was screaming at the boy. The reason: the boy had spilled a small amount of juice on the carpet while serving guests earlier that evening. Helena had been there. It was a tiny accident. No one had even reacted, but Arthur was furious. "You're a shame!" he shouted, pushing the boy back. The child cried, scared and confused, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He fell to his knees, still begging. Helena's hands trembled. She had never seen anything so cruel. Watching that scene, Helena felt something break inside her. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper. A mix of anger, helplessness, and shock. She had known for a while that Arthur was cold and controlling, but this was different. This wasn't a father correcting a child. This was pure humiliation. The boy's tears weren't just from fear, they were from pain and confusion. He truly didn't understand what he had done to deserve that kind of treatment. Helena stayed frozen behind the door. She couldn't walk away, but she couldn't go in either. When Arthur finally left the room, the boy stayed on the floor, crying softly. Helena didn't go to him right away. She waited until everything was quiet, then returned to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, shaken. What she had seen couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just harsh parenting. It was abuse. That night, Helena couldn't sleep. Her mind kept repeating what she had witnessed. She remembered the boy's voice, the way he begged for forgiveness, the way he looked so small and powerless. She thought about her own daughter and how she would have felt if someone had treated her that way. It made her stomach twist. She sat by the window, until the sky turned grey. When morning came, she put on her uniform like always, but her heart was heavy. Seeing the boy at breakfast, quiet, eyes swollen, confirmed what she already knew. He wasn't okay. He was disappearing a little more every day. Arthur sat at the head of the table, calm, as if nothing had happened. He read the newspaper and sipped his coffee. Helena watched him carefully. How could someone hurt a child like that and feel nothing? In her heart, something had shifted forever. She couldn't pretend anymore. Helena knew now that she had a choice to make. She could keep doing her job, staying silent and watching the boys suffer. Or she could act. She didn't know what the right move was, but she knew that staying still wasn't an option anymore. She began thinking of ways to gather proof. Maybe she could use her phone. Maybe she could record something or take pictures of the bruises. Maybe she could talk to someone outside the mansion. But who would believe a maid accusing one of the most powerful men in the country? Arthur was smart, careful, and respected. He had money, lawyers, and connections. Helena had none of that, but she had something stronger now, a promise she made to herself. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and she couldn't unsee it. She didn't care if it cost her job, her safety, or her peace. The boy needed protection. In the following days, Helena began acting differently. She paid more attention than ever. She memorized patterns. What time Arthur got home, when the boy was alone, what parts of the house had cameras and which didn't. She started keeping a small notebook hidden in her closet. In it, she wrote down everything: dates, times, exact words Arthur used, how the boy reacted, and any visible injuries. She wrote like someone building a case. She didn't tell the boy what she was doing. She didn't want to scare him or give him false hope. But he started to notice that she looked at him longer. She spoke to him more gently. She hugged him a little tighter. One night, he whispered, "Are you going to leave too?" Helena felt tears form in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not leaving." And for the first time, she truly meant it. Helena didn't have a clear plan yet. She didn't know how long it would take or what she would need to do, but she knew one thing with certainty: she would not let this continue. What Arthur had done was not a one-time mistake. It was part of a pattern, and it had gone on for too long. The boy was being destroyed little by little, from the inside out. She couldn't wait for someone else to help. It had to be her. That night behind the door had changed everything. It wasn't just about working in a mansion anymore. It wasn't about keeping her job. It wasn't even about her own grief. It was about stopping a man who had no right to call himself a father. For the first time in years, Helena felt like she had a reason to live again. Her new purpose was clear: protect that child, no matter what. From that day forward, Helena became a quiet, protective presence in the boy's life. She stayed close to him whenever possible, always finding reasons to be near. Whether she was folding clothes, wiping counters, or organizing the bookshelf, she made sure she was nearby. She didn't smother him with attention, but she made sure he knew she was there. Every time Arthur left the room, Helena would give the boy a small smile or a gentle touch on the shoulder. She whispered things like, "I'm here," or "You're safe now." Over time, the boy began to relax a little when she was close. He still flinched at sudden sounds and looked over his shoulder often, but he also started reaching out, taking her hand or resting his head on her arm during quiet moments. Helena saw these small actions as signs of trust. She wasn't just helping anymore, she was becoming part of his world. The boy slowly started to open up. He began talking more when they were alone, especially at night after Arthur went to bed. Lying under the covers, he would whisper stories from his past, small things that stuck in his memory. He talked about being scared, about the rules that confused him, and about how he never knew what would make Arthur angry. He said he sometimes had nightmares, and would wake up afraid to cry. Helena listened to everything without interrupting. She didn't always have the right words to answer, but she always stayed. Sometimes he would fall asleep with her sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. He told her secrets he had never said aloud, and each time she felt her heart break a little more, not from pain, but from love. In those moments, Helena didn't see him as someone else's child. She saw him as hers. Helena could feel something changing inside herself too. In the beginning, she saw him as a boy who needed help, someone she had to protect because no one else would. But now it was deeper than that. She didn't just feel sorry for him, she loved him. She started seeing pieces of her own daughter in him, the same quiet moments, the same way he clung to comfort, the same way he looked for approval. But he wasn't a replacement. He was someone new, someone who gave her a reason to care again. She had once believed that part of her life was over, that motherhood had ended with the loss of her daughter. But now, she understood that love could return in unexpected ways. The boy called her mommy openly now, not just in whispers. And she let him. She didn't correct him or push him away. It felt natural, honest, and real. Around the mansion, others began to notice their closeness. Some staff members smiled when they saw the boy holding Helena's hand. Others said nothing, but gave looks that were hard to read. Helena didn't care what anyone thought. She had made her choice. The boy needed love, and she was going to give it to him. But one person was not pleased: Arthur. At first, he said nothing, but he watched. He noticed the boy running to Helena for comfort. He saw the way the boy smiled at her, something he never did around his adoptive father. Arthur didn't like it. He'd always believed the boy was his to control, to shape, to own. Now he was losing that power, and he knew it. The bond between Helena and the boy was growing stronger each day, and Arthur could feel it slipping out of his hands. That realization filled him with quiet anger. Arthur's behavior started to change. He became colder than usual, even to Helena. He gave her extra work, pointless tasks, and often watched her closely, as if trying to catch her doing something wrong. During dinners, he criticized the boy more often, sometimes in front of others. But now, the boy responded differently. He didn't fight back, but he looked at Helena. And when he did, Arthur saw it. That look of trust, of love, of safety. It drove Arthur mad. He didn't yell like before, but his voice became sharper and his orders more strict. Helena knew what was happening. Arthur felt threatened, not by her as a person, but by what she represented, the one thing he could never create through control: real connection. Arthur had spent years building a perfect image, but now his son was finding happiness in someone else's arms, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Despite the pressure, Helena stayed calm. She didn't let Arthur's tension change how she treated the boy. If anything, she became even more careful, hiding her affection in small, quiet ways when Arthur was around, but never letting the boy feel alone. She had made a promise to protect him, and she wasn't going back on that now. Their bond was no longer something new or fragile. It had become strong, something that couldn't be broken easily, even in the darkest place, in the heart of a mansion filled with control and fear. They had built something real. The boy felt it too. He hugged her tighter. He spoke her name with warmth. He believed in her. And that belief gave Helena strength. She knew Arthur wouldn't let go easily. His pride wouldn't allow it. But Helena also knew one more thing. The love between her and that child was real, and Arthur could never take that away. Arthur had reached his limit. He could no longer ignore what was happening under his own roof. The boy was slipping away from his control, and Helena was the reason. One afternoon, when the boy had gone to his room, Arthur entered the kitchen where Helena was cleaning. He didn't yell at first. His voice was low, tense, and angry. He accused her of turning the boy against him, of poisoning his mind, and of pretending to care. He said she was crossing the line, that she was a servant, not a mother. Helena stood straight, not afraid. She looked him in the eyes and replied without shouting. "You've never been a father," she said. "You use fear, not love." Arthur's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't speak. What neither of them knew was that the boy had heard everything. He was standing behind the hallway wall, tears falling silently as he listened to every word. The boy had never heard anyone speak to Arthur that way. No one had ever defended him before. Hearing Helena stand up to the man he feared so much was like opening a locked door inside his heart. For a long time, the boy had thought everything was his fault. The punishments, the cold looks, the lack of affection. He believed that if he had been stronger, better, or more obedient, maybe Arthur would love him. But now, listening to Helena speak the truth so clearly, something changed. For the first time, he began to see Arthur not as a powerful, perfect man, but as someone broken, cruel, and wrong. The monster wasn't hidden anymore. It had a face, and it wasn't his own. The pain he had carried started to turn into something else: understanding. The fear was still there, but now there was something stronger growing inside him: courage. Later that night, while Helena was folding towels in the laundry room, the boy came to her. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. He sat down beside her and began to speak. Slowly, piece by piece, he shared what had happened over the years. He talked about the nights Arthur made him kneel for mistakes he didn't understand. He described the rules that confused him, the harsh words, and the moments when he cried alone in his room. He had never told anyone these things before. As he spoke, Helena didn't interrupt. She listened carefully, holding his hand gently. Each word hit her like a blow to the chest, but she stayed calm. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment he trusted her enough to speak. And now, there was no turning back. The truth was finally being said aloud. After their conversation, Helena knew what she had to do. Words weren't enough. The world outside the mansion wouldn't believe stories without proof. Arthur had spent years building a reputation as a generous, strong, and successful father. No one would accept a maid's word against his. So Helena got to work. Quietly, she collected evidence. She began recording conversations with her phone hidden in her pocket. She wrote down everything the boy shared, organizing it in a notebook. She also spoke to 2 other staff members who had seen troubling situations but had stayed quiet out of fear. One of them agreed to speak if necessary, not publicly, but as a private witness. Helena didn't rush. She knew this had to be done the right way. Arthur had kept his secret hidden for years, but now the wall he built was starting to crack. The image of a perfect father wouldn't last much longer. Arthur noticed a change. Helena was still doing her job, but there was something different in her eyes, a focus, a quiet strength. The boy, too, had changed. He no longer walked with his head down all the time. He still flinched when Arthur raised his voice, but he didn't run away. He stayed closer to Helena, even in front of Arthur. That's when Arthur knew he was losing control. The fear that used to keep the boy quiet was weakening. Arthur tried to tighten his grip. He gave more rules, added new punishments, but nothing worked like before. The boy obeyed, but with a distance in his eyes, like he had already left in his mind. Arthur tried to corner Helena again, but she stayed calm. What he didn't know was that every angry word, every threat, every cruel act was now being documented. His perfect image was becoming fragile, and he couldn't stop it. Helena had waited for the right time. Now it was coming. The information she had gathered was solid. The boy's testimony was clear. The other witness was ready. The recordings spoke for themselves. Arthur's reputation, built on lies and appearances, was standing on shaky ground. Helena didn't know exactly how the exposure would happen, whether through legal action, social media, or direct confrontation. but she knew the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. The boy had done the hardest part. He had spoken. He had faced his deepest fear and shared his pain. Helena had done hers. She had stayed, listened, and built the case. Together, they were ready. Arthur, once untouchable, was about to fall. His mask, polished, powerful, and fake, was starting to crack, and soon it would shatter. The man who claimed to be a father was about to be seen for who he really was. The secret he kept for years was finally ready to be exposed. The evening was planned as another one of Arthur's grand events. The dining room was filled with important people, business partners, close friends, and high-level investors. Expensive food was being served, music played softly, and the staff moved quietly between the tables. Arthur stood at the head of the room, confident and composed, ready to make a speech about success, legacy, and family. But Helena had planned something very different. Dressed neatly, she stepped forward just before Arthur raised his glass. At first, people were confused. She was the housekeeper. What was she doing interrupting? Helena held up her phone and calmly said she had something important to share. Then she played the first recording. Arthur's voice filled the room, cold and cruel, shouting insults at the boy. She played another and another. The room fell silent. Guests looked at each other in shock. This was not the man they thought they knew. Helena didn't stop there. After playing the recordings, she began to speak. She described the things she had seen in the house, how Arthur forced the boy to kneel, how he yelled at him for tiny mistakes, how he treated him like a possession, not a child. She talked about the bruises, the rules, the fear. Every word was calm but powerful. Then she turned to the boy, who had been sitting quietly in a chair nearby. She asked him if he wanted to say anything. The room held its breath. The boy stood up slowly. His hands trembled, but his voice came out steady. "He was never my father," he said. "Only my jailer." There were no more questions after that. Some guests looked away. Some cried. Others just sat in silence. The illusion Arthur had created for so many years shattered in a few minutes. He had lost control, and everyone had seen it happen. Arthur's face changed. He looked around the room and saw only judgment. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but no one wanted to hear it. His words stumbled. He raised his hand like he wanted to command silence, but the silence was already there, and it wasn't his to control. Someone had already called the police. When they arrived, Helena handed over the evidence. The officers asked the boy a few gentle questions, and he answered them clearly. Arthur was placed in handcuffs and led out through the same hallway he once used to impress guests. This time, no one clapped. No one stood up. Cameras flashed as he walked out in disgrace. The newspapers would explode with the story the next morning. Headlines would call it betrayal, scandal, a hidden horror. But for the boy, it wasn't a scandal. It was a beginning. The man who hurt him was gone. Finally, he was free. The news spread fast. Television reports, online articles, and social media posts repeated the story again and again. Billionaire Arthur M. arrested for child abuse. Some people were shocked. Others said they always felt something was off. But now the truth was public, and there was no going back. Lawyers came forward to support the case. Psychologists and child advocacy groups praised Helena's courage. She wasn't a maid anymore. She was a protector, a hero. The court moved quickly. With the boy's testimony, the recordings, and the quiet support of other workers from the mansion, Arthur had no way to escape the charges. During the hearing, the boy sat beside Helena, holding her hand. When the judge asked about guardianship, the boy said, "She's my mother now." Helena was granted full custody. The legal process was clear, and the support from the public made it stronger. The boy would never have to go back. Weeks passed. the mansion was emptied. Lawyers sorted out the legal parts, and soon much of Arthur's wealth was frozen or redirected. But a part of the inheritance was legally transferred to Helena and the boy by court order. She didn't expect it, and she didn't care about money. What mattered was that she could now care for the boy without fear. They moved into a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood. No staff, no cameras, no gold statues in the hallway. Just peace. Helena decorated the boy's room with drawings, books, and colors he liked. He chose the curtains himself. They cooked together, laughed at the dinner table, and sometimes fell asleep on the couch watching cartoons. The boy began therapy and started school again. Every morning, he kissed Helena on the cheek before leaving, and every night he called her Mom with a full heart. They were no longer afraid. Now, when they sat at the table together, there was no tension, no silence filled with fear. The boy talked freely about his day. He smiled without being told. He asked questions. He laughed. Helena watched him grow, not just in size, but in spirit. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was becoming who he really was, one day at a time. Helena, too, felt like a new person. She had carried her grief for years, thinking life had ended with her daughter. But life had brought her something unexpected. Not a replacement, but a new beginning. They ate together, read together, walked in the park on weekends. Their home was not perfect, but it was full of love. And for the first time, the boy didn't feel broken. He felt worthy. He felt seen. The man who once claimed to be his father was gone. What remained now was truth, freedom, and a real family, finally. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe until next time.